Well, guys, we've got the first Phorm Outdoors guys, Kit and Jake, coming in here for this one. And what I like about it is having new energy in camp and taking them to show all the hard work we put into this farm all year and share it with others. And these guys haven't had the opportunity to hunt a managed farm like ours, and that's always, to me, one of my passions is to share the outdoors with others and to let them experience this type of thing. And man, did we have an opening weekend on Missouri Gun.
No doubt. I think the grind of the season with you and I sitting next to each other all year, hunting and hunting and hunting, and then having two new faces come in with that. They're like, it's the first day of the season for
fresh
them.
anticipation.
Yeah, where Greg and I are like, oh my gosh, this is, we really
the rut.
Yes, yeah. So it was reinvigorating, I guess, to have them in and to take them to some of our premier locations and have some success.
Well, you didn't wait long either. My gosh, the sun came up and the gun started blazing.
That's right.
It was a cold morning, though. Holy bucks! It was in the teens, if I remember right. It was
opening day in Missouri gun season.
Chilly.
It was super chilly.
We had a little bit of snow overnight in southern Missouri. I remember that waking up, was like, there's a dusting of snow and it's in the teens and windy on top of it.
Yeah, it was cold.
Yeah, so blind was a welcome sight.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
it was. And we were headed to opposite sides
of the farm.
So, Jake and I headed into 100 Ridge, which is,
look at the map on that one so you can get an understanding of what it looks like. You're hunting a food source that's got some bedding tight. I like this almost sawtooth effect of the ridges to the north of there, where you've got all these little knolls, these little breakover ridges, which is just prime, naturally occurring bedding. But if you do a little bit of work, you can have good bedding, and then a little bit of work have great bedding. Yeah. And so you stick that, in close proximity to these bedding or to these food plots, and it's a great place to be during the rut.
That's one thing like we talk about a lot, and I think a lot of people think of the rut being so chaotic man, bucks are just running all over the places. But if you really kind of boil it down, they're doing the same thing year in, year out. And what they're doing is just finding the does and scent checking them. And if you can isolate where the does are with those dense bedding areas, then the buck activity isn't chaotic. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to use the same topography to check those areas. And so it's like kind of taking what can be super just sporadic movement and just isolating it down to where it matches with topography, where you've got access and they have to cross this opening to go from one pocket to another. That's where, hey, we can really make some consistent activity produced right here in a food plot scenario, but you're still in the rut.
Yeah. If it's the rut and I'm not close to bedding, I have to ask myself, what am I doing here?
I'm mentally out of the game.
Why am I? This goes against everything I know and do and recommend in consulting, where it's just like, why am I here again? And so for you guys, you're both set up close to known doe bedding areas that you're like, okay, we're on a food source. We got a rifle. We can see them. Did decoy out?
Yeah, on this plot, Jake and Casey took the decoy because their food plot is substantially larger than ours and a lot more visible area to shoot. And when you have guests, it's always nice to slow the game down, right?
Yeah.
Because the excitement level goes through the roof.
Sure.
They're nervous. We want it to be successful. And in this particular location, having that decoy out front definitely slowed the game down and actually had the deer actually walk dang near right next to the blind when he came out. And
that was amazing.
It was, I think it caught you both by surprise.
Yeah.
And it's a true testament, about these Nasmia blinds as well, which is, I think without the way these blinds are designed, I don't think you probably would have seen him because he would have caught the wind. And then obviously you didn't know him he was there until he basically came out in front of underneath you guys.
No doubt. And that's, for anyone that's going to decoy as much as you and I do, or a lot, it's a great tool to have, because when deer see a decoy, they naturally circle downwind of it. And if you don't have the perfect setup and a great scent-proof blind, it can be almost just detrimental. It'll ruin your hunt. In this situation, we had the windows locked up tight. We were sitting there. Jake noticed the deer first coming out, and probably the best, if I'm not mistaken, deer for working a decoy of the year. I mean, he
it's
puts on a
picture
show.
perfect.
Yeah.
And something Jake had never experienced before. He talked about that. You know, he never decoyed a deer, and what a great first impression of decoying. I mean, I don't think it could have read the script.
And that's
better.
the great thing is, you can watch Jake on the clip, is his excitement's going through the roof, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you have, people you don't hunt with that much, you don't know their skill sets, and then you throw in emotions and excitements, and things get a little bit chaotic in there. And when you throw that decoy out there, it slows the game down so much where you have time. It's no longer a rush situation, as long as you don't take too much time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the great thing about these decoys with guest hunters. Is that type of slow the game down and let him execute on his timelines instead of forcing him to execute the shot.
I think of many rut hunts where a buck is chasing a doe, or he's a buck who's looking for a receptive doe, so he's bird dogging his way through the woods and he's moving lots, very chaotic. And I think of many hunts as a younger hunter where buck were chasing does by me, and it was hey. And it's like, we didn't get him stopped, and it's like the decoy can help at least slow it down for a second while he takes a look at the decoy, and then you take your shot.
And frankly, I mean, when there's a decoy out there, you can get away with a lot more.
Oh,
because
visually he's locked in.
He's visually locked in. His senses are on that decoy, and it just makes the environment of the hunt so much more enjoyable. And it's a completely different experience. I mean, he kept saying it over and over that he's looking forward to this. And we came back to camp, he's like, that was something he's never experienced before. And if you've ever haven't done a decoy, it changes the whole experience.
Well, I think what's cool too is one, not only did he then continue the management side of harvesting does, which kudos, you have to do. That's all part of this. But also just the comparing and contrasting of the two different bucks that were harvested that morning. Kit's buck was the kind of the polar opposite of, didn't seem to have a ton of attitude, but he was still on a mission from just cruising.
Yep.
And there wasn't any does right there close at the time. And so he was, if you will, more to himself in the environment, head down, checking. Was it obviously, we don't know if a doe had walked through there in the
Could only assume
previous
based
hours,
on his activity.
But he was cruising. And then this deer was also cruising, I think at a higher speed. You see it on that 360 camera. But bam, I mean, when he locks into that decoy, it's just like shifts down into first gear and just starts to interact. So really neat to be able to see both those hunts transpire, but two different activity levels, I guess, from the bucks themselves.
Yeah, we were on that side of the farm. Jake had harvested his deer, and we were not texting or communicating with Greg because we were like, I wonder what kind of morning they're having. We haven't heard anything. And then when we finally got the text saying that you were successful, you let the cat out of the bag, that the movement was completely different.
Pretty slow. Yeah. And I think that goes back to us having the information through our reveal cameras. We're in two proven spots that predominantly produce a lot of doe activity. Yeah. And Casey obviously experienced it way sooner than we did that morning. But the deer that Kit ended up harvesting was there for a reason, which was he was scent checking. And he was cruising. Why? Because that spot there was very proven. For whatever reason, our activity that morning was very slow and diminished. But at any time when you're in those proven spots, it can happen that time of year.
I think that's rut hunting to a T. You could be, have the perfect weather, the perfect setup and scenario, and sometimes you're like, it's going to happen that morning, but you get in there and like, well, man, I just don't feel like the does are right here, and then you don't see buck activity. But it just takes one cruiser to change the ball game. You guys had that experience, and then you guys were all over them. Yeah. And then that's the other polar opposite of a good rut hunt. It's like you could feel like you can do everything wrong, and they just keep piling through. But that's what's so interesting about November hunting whitetails. You just never know what you're in for.
Especially mid-November with a gun in your hand in Missouri.
Yep. Well, I think the Kit's setup, explain that one to us a little bit, guys, because we got the map and all pulled up, but this thing is a heck of a pinch through a gate, and I know that's a prime spot for the reveal to be set up, and you get a lot of activity that goes through there. But beyond just knowing, hey, there's some quality areas that we routinely see does bedded in. What does that breakdown kind of look like?
Well, when you look at the map here, you've got, obviously in yellow, we've got the plot itself, and then we've got the 2 red zones, which is we've done some improved habitat through cutting and increasing the bedding. But also, don't overlook the water hole that's due south of that. And so between, we've kind of created a triangle there, which is they're going from the bedding to the food to the water, and they're constantly doing that triangle. And it's the perfect recipe. We're coming from the west. Our exit and entry is bulletproof, and when they're there, when we had first took over this property, I'm like, you know what? I don't know if this is really going to really produce. And now it is probably one of our top spots, purely because of what we've done and the food, the cover, and the water, all within close proximity to each other. So they're constantly moving in that triangle format, so we're constantly putting eyeballs on something.
Right.
Which is really, I didn't, because there's, that wooded is not that big.
Right. It doesn't look that big. It looks like a lot more open right here in this region. So naturally you wouldn't maybe gravitate to it because cover's rather limited. But when you find those areas and you manipulate the cover in them, and those are utilizing, you're going to have, especially during the rut, some great activity around it.
And note that you have south-facing and northeast-facing slopes. So we have the ability to have deer bedded in the shade if it's a little warmer in November, or on that south-facing slope if it's a little colder in November, which that day it was a little colder. So we anticipated deer to be bedded kind of on that south-facing slope. So,
very good example, again, of us starting in a different location, viewing deer utilizing that gate gap, and then moving that location. We started to the south when we first had this blind. I think the first set we had was with Greg's son, Derek.
Okay.
And we sat down to the south and watched.
Good,
literally watched.
150 yards,
Watch everything go
175
through the
yards south. Yeah, it's a good point.
And we had seen that gate gap and thought, man, this might be where we need to be, but let's hang back and see what's going to happen with it. And then as we monitored it for a couple of years, we ended up making the switch.
And I think, to jump on Casey's point real quick, is that blind and that food plot was about 150, 200 yards due south of where it sits today on the next knoll on top. And what we were trying to do was pull deer from different locations, not only from the south, from the east, and from the north, more centrally on that partial. And then we watched it, and we're like, all the deer want to go to the north, and they want to be up there, even though our food source wasn't even there. That's where they wanted to be. So why force it, right?
Right.
So we completely demolished, tilled it over, reset, moved the blind, created a new set, and it was like it went from 1 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. Purely because they already want to be there. Now we created what they needed, where they want to be. Now it's just trying to figure it all out.
And that buck would have gone through that gate gap, correct? The way he was.
I don't know. He was more heading south.
Okay.
There must have been a doe there that evening or early morning, because the way he was acting, he was on something.
Gotcha.
And he was moving towards the south, and lucky for Kid, he was, 15, 16, 17 yards away. So it was a perfect, and we've set that blind up for bow hunting. That's what it's designed to do. But obviously we're with the gun. But and that's even another great point, is when you have a lot of our sets are, I guess, designed more bow friendly than gun friendly. But when you have guests in, it sure is nice to put them in a spot that is going to reel them in and put them in a little closer to minimize the potential of missing. So it was as good as a slam dunk as we could possibly lay up. But it happened fast, and that spot is that, because it's so tight to cover, and when they come out, they're on you quick, and you can't be relaxed in that blind. When you put your butt in the seat, you're going to be looking around all the time.
Hot seat.
It's the hot seat, because when it happens, it moves quick, and you don't have time to make any adjustments. It's one of those prime things that having guests in camp is, it changes the energy in camp. I think it puts more energy into us because we have such a long season. To see the looks on their faces when they harvest, in Kit's life, his largest buck of his life, that's what it's all about. And we're chasing experiences with friends and partners and exposing the outdoors, and that's what I really love to do. Well, we just finished up the complete breakdown of this entire hunt. Check out the link to see the whole thing go down.